pulling out all the acronyms in our title. My name is Persephone Ma. I use she, her pronouns. And I have been involved with DEI stuff in the department up until about 2020, through 2020.
And I'm Jennifer Nicklay. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a current member of the SWAC DEI committee, as well as the facilitator of the Unlearning Racism in Geoscience pod in our department. Next slide. Thank you. So our goal for today, because we have such a short time together, it's really hard to condense what we've learned about diversity, anti-racism, equity, justice, decolonialization, diversity. It's really hard to put that all in 15 minutes. And so, like the rainbow fish from our childhood picture book that many of us might be familiar with, we're hoping to just share some scales with you, some key ideas and reflections to inspire our ongoing work together.
So first, to give you some context for our department, the demographics of our department are what you would expect for our fields and in academia, which are earth science and agriculture based. Our faculty were primarily white males until 2000, when the proportions of women in international faculty started to go up. But still, until I would say, my personal opinion, 2019, diversity and conversations around diversity were pretty much, look how diverse we are, look how many countries we come from, which is great, but there was no domestic diversity to speak of. In 2018, as a reaction to Trump's anti-immigrant sentiment, the department brought back an old event formerly known as International Night. We changed the name to Experience All Traditions, or Eat Night, to broaden the title and pretty much invite our predominantly white department to acknowledge and reflect on their own cultural backgrounds. And the theme that you'll hear, that you've probably heard already, you can't just do one thing and be done with DEI work. The department also wrote a department level DEI statement to formalize the commitment to diversity and to give more support to Eat Night as a cultural celebration and not just a feel good, looks good type of event. All this is to say that by 2020, we had done some things, but I think the combination of being primed with these new initiatives and, in my humble opinion, having the set of really well-meaning but not terribly reactive, predominantly white department members, made us ready to try something new and take a different approach in 2020.
Because on May 25th, 2020, George Floyd was murdered by Minneapolis police officers. He wasn't the first or the last Black person in the Twin Cities whose life was ended by police violence. Members of our department located on the St. Paul campus don't need to look far for a reminder of this. Philando Castile was killed by police just blocks from our offices. Significant structural changes were not undertaken after Mr. Castile's death, but our situation was different last summer when Mr. Floyd was killed. While many in our department shared that they felt discomfort, guilt, or paralysis of how to move forward, I think several factors came together to activate us. The ways the pandemic had laid bare existing inequalities, the fear and uncertainty of that first week that so many, especially fellow white folks, aren't used to feeling. And the inspiration of watching the uprising bloom, of seeing so many people stand up for Black life, and watching and participating in mutual aid networks that were everywhere. Combined with the foundational work our department had been doing, as Persephone shared, we were able to overcome the needed activation energy and take action.
So, as Jennifer said, after George Floyd's killing, we hit that activation energy. With that, this is a figure that I use to describe what happens in my head after an event like this. Please bear with the nerdiness. So, right after an event, part A happens. There's this huge peak in how much people collectively care, how much energy, attention, time, whatever is spent. And then after a while, part B happens, where that peak starts to dissipate for whatever reason, whether it's, guilt subsiding, real life calling, being emotionally exhausted, combination of all of those or more. But our hope was to not completely return to the status quo, but to raise the status quo through education and awareness, to integrate DEI into everyday life, and to extend that tail of that dissipating energy. Make sure it goes as long as possible, in which people still have the will and the drive to change policy, also hopefully adding to the change in status quo. Our department specifically had a two-pronged approach to deal with parts A and parts B of this figure. We will also hopefully leave time for questions if anyone wants to come back to any of this. So our short-term response, to address part A in the short term, we created a temporary group called the Living Our Values group. Their first goal was to address the immediate spin up of energy and help people through that pretty intense emotional response, and direct it into personal education on issues of racial justice, either through resources or having personal individual conversations. The group's second goal was to collect ideas and sentiments from these conversations in our department and capture them as the basis for things that the department could take action on. The following guidelines and themes helped us navigate what was really new for almost all of us. With guideline 1, we really wanted to bring as many people from the department along with us as possible, both to increase the overall awareness in the department, but also with the hopes that when harder structural or policy changes came down, that people would be ready. More in guideline 2, we were also very aware of the tendencies for academics, myself included, to intellectualize hardship and emotion, which is fine sometimes, but also can reduce the magnitude of an event. And so the Living Our Values group specifically sought to create opportunities for people to work through any and all emotions and reactions that were happening. Very often we ran into the issue of being paralyzed because we didn't want to make a mistake. It's a minefield really of what you're doing and how you're doing it. But we knew that if we wanted to learn how to do this work, guideline 3, we had to move forward and commit to learning from our mistakes. Otherwise nothing was going to happen. And we certainly made some. However, to prevent some really common mistakes, we had guideline 3, we tried to lean on both BIPOC experiences that we heard or read and DEI experts. One decision that our department very nearly made, we had lined up moderators, had set times, structure, was to have a department town hall or listening session, which is very common, and I saw a lot happening in our university. After a conversation with our college's Office of Diversity and Inclusion Director, Jody Gray, we realized that a town hall would not accomplish what we were looking for. And in addition, it had a really high likelihood of re-traumatizing people, especially at the time, Black and Indigenous folks. Instead, we learned from lessons learned by the Land Stewardship Project, which is a great nonprofit you should check out. And they practiced having individual conversations with people, ideally Keystone people, about racial justice, and encourage them to continue the conversation in their lab groups, office groups, whatever their sphere of influence is. So then the second piece of that figure that I showed you, part B, was our SWAC DEI roadmap, and that was taken on by the consultative committee. While all this was going on, our department head, Carl Rosen, charged our department's consultative committee, an existing committee, to create a DEI strategic plan by the end of the summer. It started with ideas from our Living Our Values conversations and an anonymous portal that we had opened to field ideas and thoughts. We also added ideas from BIPOC lists of demands, including the petition from Black geoscientists and other similar type outlets. From there, it was cleaning and organizing the data and fleshing out actual implementation examples of how various pieces would look. One important thing to note was that at the very beginning, the head of the consultative committee, Professor Nick Jelinski, was very intentional on ensuring that we had a clear idea of what the expectations were, how long the group would meet, what the deliverable was, what it would look like, and who would take it on afterwards. Basically, at the start of this initiative, he ensured that a DEI committee would be stood up in the fall of 2020 to take on this work. Without creating this stepping stone, it would have made this work seem completely unmanageable, especially during a pandemic. Luckily, the consultative committee of, I think, 5 or 6 had the help of 20 outside people from within the department who are interested and willing to help. And we published a working, very imperfect, perpetually in motion DEI roadmap at the beginning of September.
At that point, the DEI committee was formed. So a note that previously our department had chosen the consultative committee to do DEI work because this committee has the power to make changes. And one concern about DEI committees is that they don't have that power often, that they can be just something to point at and say that you're doing something without like the meat behind them to actually make things happen. So our DEI committee was designed to not do that, to not fall into that trap. We have staggered appointments and term limits for continuous appointments. And we have faculty, staff, and grad student members to make sure that DEI is everyone's work and it's not falling on the shoulders of a select group. We also have a structural and procedural focus to look at like what are the changes that need to be made in how we do our work. Next slide. So some of the roadmap things were done even before the DEI committee started. The GRE requirement is gone. The seminar series has been revised because people looked at the roadmap and said, these are things we can do now. The DEI committee is focusing on the longer term changes. And that has required a lot of relationship building and discussion that sometimes feels achingly slow. But then I remember that if I were working with a community research partner, I would be like, yes, this is a necessary step to make sure that we are together on this when we need to be going hard to make these long-term changes. So we've prioritized the roadmap tasks and we're working on a hiring checklist and have more to do. I know I'm almost out of time, so just note I only have 2 slides left, so I'm good. Next slide, Persephone. So one way we're doing this is through the Unlearning Racism in the Geosciences program, which is a national program funded by the NSF to build capacity among geoscientists for anti-racism work in their personal and professional lives. The deliverables from this program are feeding straight into roadmap action items that the DEI committee is working on. Next slide, Persephone. I know I've gone totally off the script I said that I was going to do. This has led us to our hopes and concerns for the future. We're a small department and we have strong relationships, and that can help us focus on transformation rather than reform. And we're hearing more people know that DEI needs to be in all aspects of their work. But it's still, with a predominantly white department, focusing on BIPOC-driven ideas is difficult. Centering anti-Black racism is important, and also it's important to acknowledge the many identities that are missing from our department. We want to call in especially tenured faculty and staff. We want to focus on compensating this kind of labor. And how do we measure progress? Because we are scientists. We like measuring things. And we like knowing what progress we've made. And with that, we are happy to take questions.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, this is really interesting, and especially for someone in a different department, really great to hear what you guys are working on in your department. So we do have about a minute available for questions, and it looks like we have one in the chat from Emma Link. Can you talk about any challenges and benefits of doing this work in an academic department where lots of community members are only here for a short time?
Persephone, I can take a stab first if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I think that a big benefit of that is that with so many folks doing perhaps a master's program or with shorter postdocs, that's lots of new ideas coming in. That's lots of fresh perspective. That's lots of people who aren't willing, who come in and are like, I don't know any of you, and like I don't know like what's gone into this, so I'm not attached to this the like history of DEI work, and this is what you're still doing that's not good enough. So I think that that's a major benefit. But of course, like, especially in the pandemic where we don't get to meet each other, it's hard to build those relationships, to welcome people into the DEI committee or to other processes we have going, to make sure people feel invested and in like a way that like knowing that this is their department too. I say this like in the middle of the pandemic when I still haven't met so many of y'all in person.
Yeah, and I think it does bring up our concern of calling in tenured faculty and staff. I think that it has to be a partnership between the people who are coming in and bringing in these new ideas and the people who can stay and implement it and watch it, you know, continue to go. We have pre-tenure faculty, but the tenured faculty have a different kind of freedom and arguably more time, not arguably, more time than pre-tenured faculty. So it really is about that partnership and having those tenured faculty listening to the people who are coming in and helping them realize what they want within the department with a short amount of time.